All right, so we're here today again with Peyton, and today we're discussing basically how money affects our politics. And so we have a couple of stories here. We've got Amazon story and then leading into a Cuomo story, where in both cases, big money plays a big instance in the perceptions and decisions that get made. So starting off with Amazon, we've seen there's a clip going around of Amazon where a bunch of different stations have played basically the same clip. In other words, Amazon has sent the script and a number of cuts for the stations to use, and basically written the script for these stations to make it look like they've done their own reporting and make it seem like, this is just news reporting that station has done. So let's go ahead and we'll take a look at that video right now.
Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
Amazon has transformed its operations in response to COVID-19 to protect employees and keep packages flowing.
Amazon has transformed its operations in response to COVID-19 to protect employees and keep packages flowing.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy while still delivering those packages to your doorstep.
The company is keeping employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
It spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
It has spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
It has spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
It has spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
Amazon says it has spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
Every single one of Amazon's workforce of nearly 1 million people has played a critical role in making these changes happen.
I hope that they feel that passion that we have for safety,
so they can stay safe and healthy while you do too.
Okay, so Peyton, what's your take on this?
This clip is absolutely wild. I saw this, I was laughing. This looks like it's communist propaganda, the kind of propaganda that they play like, oh my gosh, look at these communists completely brainwashing people. But oh no, here we are in a capitalist society getting brainwashed by Amazon, telling us they spend $800 million in overtime and pay and wages, when, by the way, also they're cracking down on unions. They're they're firing people firing people who are trying to start unions. They're cutting people's hours, all kinds of crazy stuff. People are complaining, people are demanding that they get a pay raise, rightfully so. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and they're meanwhile they're running all these ads about how they need to how they care about frontline workers, when in many respects their workers are like the frontline workers, but then they're not really doing anything to actually seriously provide for workers and provide worker safety.
Yeah, and so it's disturbing that basically what they're able to do is spend large amounts of money to basically create their own propaganda by getting this to television stations. Now, there's a number of ways in which these TV stations are corrupt, and one of them is, the easiest one is just you do the work for them. You send them the information, you send them the clips you want, you send them the script, and then they don't have to do any work at all. They just plug it right into the newscasters who go from there and just read it word for word, which blows my mind because, even in school you're taught, okay, you don't just go online and find what you're supposed to write about. You read it, and then you're supposed to change things here and there, right? You're supposed to change a few sentences and change the wording and make it your own. They're literally just reading the script that they were handed.
And I mean, unfortunately, though, that's very common in TV cable news, where a lot of them are just actors. A lot of them, didn't really study political science or study, any other kind of academic pursuit. They maybe studied communications. They maybe studied journalism, which, look, nothing wrong with that. Right. I enjoy reading rhetoric and, learning rhetoric and stuff like that. But the idea that you're just supposed to be an actor up there, reading from a script definitely isn't how a lot of people conceive of, conceive of these people. Now, there was a hilarious moment in the middle there where I don't know her name, but one of the newscasters, a lady in kind of a blue dress, kind of flinched a little bit when she was saying, "Oh, Amazon has spent all kinds of money on overtime pay." She flinches a little bit. Right. I don't know if you guys caught that. I was cracking up at that. I was like, yeah, she knew that this was a bit of BS sprinkled in there. But she was like, I guess this is what we're going with.
It spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
Yeah, and that's exactly part of the problem, because if you have the fact that they're being handed these scripts and they're not really doing any of their own news reporting, then you have to wonder how can they really verify that there's truth to the story if someone who not even associated with that news organization wrote the script that they're just reading live. I mean, it could say anything, right, and they're just reading it, could be completely counterfactual, it's upsetting.
And actually, that's kind of part of the problem when it comes to trying to pump out a whole bunch of content, because you end up in a situation where, you obviously have to have researchers, you have to have other people who are doing the background research, and then gives you the stories, gives you the relevant information. So the more work you're trying to pump out, the less you as an individual are actually able to sort of check it and look into it ourselves. We love to criticize independent media, or at least, some people do. But when it comes to independent media, yeah, you might be getting, I guess, like a bias or whatever, but there's that balance there where at least the person who's talking about it at least did the research to, tell you what they're talking about. So
yeah, which connects to a larger issue, and I'll leave a link down in the description, but many people may have seen a while back, Jon Oliver did a piece on this, where a lot of these supposedly local news stations are actually owned by the Sinclair Corporation, which then feeds these local stations exactly what they're supposed to say, and it's becoming increasingly right-wing political commentary that they're supposed to put out there as if it's a news story. So you've got, on one hand, you've got the corporations literally writing, like Amazon, writing what the people on camera are going to say. And then you have the owners of the company telling reporters exactly what they're going to say. And you really have to wonder, is there really any, how is a person supposed to get decent news these days if big money is dictating what is actually news?
Well, it's why so many people are going to YouTube to get their news these days. And it's just like the numbers keep going up. It keeps going up. More and more people going to YouTube to get their news, which actually brings me to an interesting point, which is YouTube has been trying to invest a lot more in local news. Some of the, right now, unfortunately, most of the investments are in higher income areas. For instance, in Fairfax County, I think parts of Los Angeles County, YouTube is trying to invest in, getting reporters who actually just report the news and are basically independent YouTubers, who are doing local reporting news. But then YouTube, like if they meet certain qualifications and whatever, those standards are still being developed and YouTube is still piloting it. But they would basically promote those YouTubers to all the local residents who log in to YouTube on that area. And so it's an interesting approach. We'll have to see how that goes moving forward. I know that they got a contract deal with the Young Turks, and the Young Turks is being involved in the training of that. I did actually apply to that program. I don't know if I'll do it yet. I was just kind of curious. But it's an interesting thing. We're going to have to see. I heard that it is a significant monetary investment, and I think that it's going to be fully rolling out in 2022. So it's still definitely pilot stage, still definitely people looking into it, and it is a possible alternative, at least in the short run. There's all kinds of limitations when it comes to YouTube, but certainly compared to being owned by all one corporation or just a few corporations out there who all have interest in right-wing propaganda, you could argue that it's at least a step. And I think, there is an interesting connection there with like corporate control of the media and the ways in which politicians intentionally and actively sort of hijack news stations for their political advantage. We saw, for instance, with Andrew Cuomo, he's been caught up in a bit of a nursing home scandal recently. And one of the things that he said coming out of it, we'll get into the details about the nursing home scandal in just a second, but one of the things that he said was that because MSNBC and CNN weren't really covering it, Andrew Cuomo came out and said that, oh, well, these are just Republicans trying to, make political hay out of this thing. And so because of the fact that CNN, MSNBC, and these, Democratic-leaning sources weren't covering it, he's able to try to spin it as just Republican propaganda. It's just nonsense. We don't even need to talk about it. So this whole idea of objectivity gets thrown out of the window that way.
Right. We really need stations to be calling both sides out. You can't be for one team and then say, well, but we're objectively taking care of things here. Yeah,
Right.
and the Cuomo situation has a couple of layers to it with the, like the actual story about the nursing homes where he was sending people that were infected back to nursing homes. And then he's going back and saying that, so I didn't have a chance to look this up, but saying that was actually the guidelines that were recommended, which sounds kind of crazy that you'd be recommending sending people into nursing homes who are infected. I mean, the experts are saying this is basically a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
So that's difficult. And then you have the fact that so apparently, and this stuff just looks bad no matter what. When you take money from an interest, and apparently Cuomo got a big infusion of money during the 2018 campaign from the nursing home companies, and then he's come out and he's limited their liability, which, I've been calling out Mitch McConnell because that's a big thing he wants to push coming up, and saying what a horrible idea it is that we should be limiting liability for companies, and then now we got Cuomo doing it.
Yeah. So, for instance, he tried to blame the president. Andrew Cuomo was blaming the president. Oh, don't look at me. Blame the president for his policy proposals. But actually, this is an instance where it actually is Andrew Cuomo and not the president that he's trying to blame, because the president's the sort of president, the administration, whatever however you want to say it, his recommendation was that actually what you do is you send patients that nursing homes should be willing to accept patients from hospitals who are fighting coronavirus. So in other words, you've recovered from coronavirus at the hospital. And then now you're coming back to the nursing home. That nursing homes can't then, shouldn't refuse you. But Andrew Cuomo's policy was that those patients who were fighting coronavirus and still sick with coronavirus should come into the nursing home. Like, who wrote this? Who did this? I'm not a disease expert. I can tell you that's stupid. I'll tell you right now, that's stupid. But that's what you do. That's what you do when you're taking moneyed interest, because guess what? The hospitals who are fighting coronavirus, the hospitals who are oftentimes inundated and struggling and wanted to make more money to make more space for beds, well, what are they going to do to the older people? Well, they can't make as much money there, so they send them off to the nursing homes and then just, let life be damned. Let life be damned. Let's make some money.
Yeah, and it's hard to know exactly what to do with people if the hospitals are filling up and where to place people. But the idea that you would send them into like a healthier situation just seems kind of crazy. And they can sit there and say, well, this was a Trump recommendation. But let's face it, there's been a lot of pushback on a lot of Trump recommendations during this whole coronavirus situation. So feel free to Cuomo to step up and do your own thinking and make your own decisions from your own experts about this.
That's actually a really, really good point, because that's one of the things that Democrats always do, right? When they don't go along with Trump and they fight him, the little bit of times that they actually do fight him, they say, look at us, we're fighting him. And then when they turn around and just go along with Trump because they're not willing to fight him, then they try to turn around and blame the president. They say, look at what Donald Trump did. There was nothing I could do. I can't do anything about this. That's just the way the rules are written.
Yeah.
No, you have a responsibility to stand up and fight, but you didn't fight. That's your fault. That's your fault. Right. You don't get to turn around and blame the administration for that. Come on, man. Come on. We taught you that in preschool.
Yeah, and this underlying liability issue is just super concerning that he would be a part of that. Because like I say, I keep calling that out in my videos. And the truth is, you don't really need to reduce liability that much, because if companies are doing what they're supposed to do, they're not going to get sued for spreading coronavirus because they're meeting all the safety standards. What we're talking about is
Chris,
removing like extra levels so that they don't even have to put the safety procedures into place.
Hold on, Chris. I think you're being a little unfair here. You need to keep in mind, these corporations have to make as much money as possible.
Right.
So if they have all kinds of safety standards, don't you know that means that they'll make 1% less money?
Right.
You know that, right, Chris?
Yeah.
That's not acceptable.
Yeah.
Right.
How's Bezos going to become a trillionaire?
Exactly. He's only going to get $999 billion. Right. We can't have that. Can't have that. Yeah, and so it's just a clear instance where in New York State, it would seem that the health department is completely controlled, completely subjugated by the hospital industry. And that's another problem, which is that hospitals are an industry. Their first priority, their first interest is to make money, because you got all these shareholders who are investing thinking, oh, I can turn a profit. I can give my money out and make more money out. When you're talking about human life, you're talking about an instance where hospitals, their sole and only focus should be the preservation of human life, making people healthier, not trying to turn a profit, not trying to make money. Because the other thing we're seeing, by the way, hospitals during a time of crisis, during a pandemic, are going out of business. They're struggling to make money because they made all their money on elective procedures, and coronavirus doesn't quite pay as much money. So at the time when we need them most, they're bailing out. They're saying, hold on, I can't get my checks anymore. I'm done. I can't cash my checks. I don't care about you. I don't care about life. They're just cashing out. What kind of citizen is that? What kind of virtue does that cultivate in our life when we say that, oh, well, if you can't make money doing something, then that means it's not worth doing? That's a problem.
Yeah. And that's what I get so upset when you constantly hear this refrain that, blank should be run like a business. School should be run like a business. Healthcare should be run like a business. Everything should be run like a business. And it's like, okay, so you literally have people's lives hanging in the profit margin, right? I mean,
exactly. That is such a good point. Neoliberalism is such a problem because when they say that, right, what do they mean? Oh, they say, oh, X should be run like a business. They mean it should be run efficiently. But the problem is, how do you define efficiency for an industry? And it ends up just being the only thing that you can quantify oftentimes is dollar signs, is money. Right. And so you talk about saving money, saving cash, when really there's oftentimes, when you talk about profit, you're talking about concentrations of money. You're not necessarily talking about the diffuse goods and values which can come out from something like, say, public transportation. So you end up in a situation with, DC public transportation right now, and something that I'm pretty passionate about is just completely falling apart. We have like the worst there is other issues with DC public transit, which is that, you're trying to communicate with, Maryland, DC, Northern Virginia. So, there's just communication issues there. But so much of it also is that there's this big thought that, oh, well, we have to make it at least value neutral. We're not spending money on public transportation, so we have to raise ticket fare. Then what happens when ticket fare goes up? Well, people leave. It's like, yeah, but you're trying to make a public transit system that people can use. Okay, You're not sitting here trying to figure out how you can make sure that you spend the littlest amount of money possible.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta, if you want to have a good society, right? It's gonna cost some money. You're gonna have to do that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just another instance there when it comes to Andrew Cuomo, when it comes to Amazon. All these companies are just trying to hijack this idea of profit, hijack this idea of money, to hijack these things that maybe honestly shouldn't even be in private sphere. These these small local news organizations, hijack them so that then you can turn around and make money with them. And in the case of politics, it becomes particularly pernicious where you look at CNN, you look at MSNBC, and they represent the corporate interest of, that also sort of, back the Democratic Party. So then if those corporate interests of MSNBC, of CNN, don't turn around and cover a story, then you just get to turn around and say, oh, they're Russian bots. It's a non-story, right? You don't need to listen to them. You can just ignore them, not realizing that, oh, maybe facts are facts, right? And so it just really kind of rots a lot of people's brains. You go on Twitter, again, I mentioned Russian bots. People call you a bot for pointing out obvious things because they say, oh, well, there's a bias there, and that bias might help Donald Trump, therefore you're a Russian bot. And it's kind of a disaster. Our political discourse is falling apart for it. So needs to be some serious reforms in the way in which newscasting happens. Maybe YouTube can be a first step, but there's, seems like there's a lot to go.
Yeah, and all of this coming together showing the dangers of big money in news and big money in politics, and the things that go sideways once you start letting big money call the shots rather than we're supposed to be about for the people. So thanks, Peyton, for that discussion. That was a great discussion, and we'll check you out in the future. Head over to Fourth Radical, check out Peyton's videos, and subscribe over there. And we'll see you soon, Peyton. Thanks.
Peace. Thanks for having me.